Hey, today we're going to talk about establishing turf grass. It's something that's important to do it right. So let's jump right into it. Share my screen with you. Some nice turf grass here at the BYU Lavelle Edwards Stadium. It doesn't just happen that way. It takes some careful planning and practice. So in terms of establishing, I've prepared these steps as well as a little mnemonic to try to help you if you need to memorize them. Frankly, I don't have it memorized other than I've just done it so many times. I just know all these steps, but it's important to do these steps. It's really critical to start with subsoil grading and make sure that your subsoil is graded to the same contour as your final product. We want to remove any debris. I can't tell you how many times we have found problems after the fact because construction debris was just buried over with a small amount of soil. It's important to put in the water system, both drainage and irrigation systems if they're needed. Add the topsoil. You need at least 4 inches. 8 would be nice. I usually can't afford to do that much, so usually we get by with 4. If I need lime, and I would only know that if I did a soil test, so you need to do a soil test. Typically, that only happens in the east where I need lime, where pHs are low. But I would want to add limestone if needed, and then make sure that gets tilled in so that it can start to raise the pH up to a better level. I can add that to established turf grass, but it's just so much more efficient if I do it before I put the grass in, and it's going to help the grass health. Nutrients have to be added, especially those that are not very mobile, phosphorus being the most important one of that group. We also would typically apply some starter nitrogen, although that's more mobile. And if I put it on established turf grass, it's going to work its way down better than phosphorus would. We typically would apply some type of herbicide application to the surface. Make sure I do weed control. It's actually probably my biggest concern in establishing turf is weeds. In fact, a lot of times, if I can talk folks into it in delaying putting down the sod, or especially seed, it's nice to spray with a broad spectrum herbicide to kind of just kill everything out, and even just let it sit and you water it a little bit and get that sprayed twice, just to try to get as many of those weeds as I possibly can before I get before I put the sod or the seed on. Then we do the final grading on the topsoil, again matching it to the subsoil. We want a consistent amount of topsoil across the surface. And then we want to firm it up to remove wheel tracks and other minor indentations, but also to create a nice, good seed bed. So that's basically the steps of establishing. Here's a couple examples of when the soil wasn't firm and then somebody drove on it and it just kind of was mush and it created a big problem. Again, the topsoil and the subsoil need to be consistent, same grade. That's important. The organisms that cause fairy ring often feed off of buried wood. So a lot of times we're establishing turf at a construction site. House was recently built, and sometimes we see some wood debris. That stuff needs to be taken care of. It can cause problems with roots as well as disease. By the way, I'm taking these figures out of Nick Christian's book, Fundamentals of Turf Grass. Timing of when we want to establish turf. Warm season grasses are best established in the spring after soil temperatures are sufficiently high. And I'd say we need to be in this low 60s at least to establish that grass. Cool season grasses are actually best established in the fall, the early fall. We don't want to wait too late. Like Provo, Utah, we're talking like the first part of September is really kind of the ideal. However, the reality is that professionals establish grass all season long, and it's not ideal necessarily, for example, to try to be doing seed in the middle of the summer, but we do it all the time, and it can work. It just takes a little more effort to keep it moist and happy. In terms of seeding, a whole bunch of different things to factor in here. We want to look at what kind of weeds are in there. This first bullet point references that. Look at the seed label and make sure I don't have a bunch of weed grasses in there. It's very important to seed to the proper depth. Make sure I look that up. Typically, we're 1/2 to 1 inch for kind of larger size seeds. Very small seed typically wants to be just right at the surface, just barely below or right at the surface. Soil's got to be kept moist during seed establishment. We want frequent light irrigations. We can use a straw mulch, although you got to be careful of weed seeds, or some kind of a seed mat, or even a liquid gel can be used to kind of help keep the soil moist. We want to be careful when we do that first mowing. We don't want to mow too soon, but we also don't want to wait too long. We have this 1/3 rule. We don't want to ever take off more than 1/3 of the shoot, because it can scalp the plant basically, and it takes off too much, and then it does harm, and we get poor root growth. We want to put on some starter fertilizer. You can see this here. We'll talk about fertilizer more in other sessions. And then weed control needs to be delayed. When those plants are small seedlings, probably not the best time to be applying herbicide. We want to wait until about the 3rd mowing before we hit it with any kind of herbicide. When we look at the seed label, we want to understand what's on there. One of the things that we need to realize is what we call pure live seed. That's basically the percentage that I can kind of count on. When I buy seed, not all of it is pure grass, and not all of it is going to germinate. And so when the seed was sold, they have to test it to see what percentage germinates, and then also test it to see how much of it is purity. And we multiply those two numbers together to get the percentage of pure life seed. So for example, if I have a 50-pound bag of seed with 92% purity, which means 8% other stuff, and 90% germination, that means I would multiply 0.92 by 0.9 by 50, and that means I've got actually 41.4 pounds of actual pure live seed. We get different types of seeds. I'm not a really big fan of trying to hold my students and others to what exactly these things look like. Folks that work in the industry understand the seed and what it looks like, but for me, I just mostly look it up when I need to. Here's an example of a label. You can see different types of things on here. A lot of times when we buy grasses, there's more than one type. So for example, in this particular bag, there is Kentucky bluegrass, moonlight variety. We have a creeping red fescue, Fenway variety, and then a perennial ryegrass, Manhattan 2 variety. And you can see that it's got the purity of the seed. That's the pure live seed. And that's the percentages that are factored in there, as well as the germination percentages over here. And then the other ingredients, other things that happen to be in there, 0.35% other crop seed. So that could be like wheat. 0.77% weed seed. That's the one I'm really worried about. And then 1.75% inert matter. And then noxious weeds. Those are the ones I don't like weeds, but I especially don't want the noxious weeds. And in this particular lot, there were none. So we're happy with this one. Sod is different. Sod's better, frankly. If I can afford to sod, I am much more likely to do that than seed. Seeding is a hassle. It's really hard to control weeds. Most people have a hard time keeping it healthy and happy. Sod is so much better because it just helps tremendously with weed control, and I have instant lawn. It's not established, but it's, as long as I don't let the roots die, it's basically instant lawn. I want to thin cut my sod. I don't want too much soil brought in. That increases the cost of the sod. Plus, it's not as healthy for it. We want those roots to grow down into the new soil. So we want to have some thin cut sod. Now, there are exceptions to that. Like in some sports turf situations, I'm actually intentionally getting very thick cut sod. We want the soil to be similar. It doesn't have to be exact, but the sod farm has clay and I've got sand. That's not a good thing to have these sharp textural interfaces. So I want, something, if I've got a loam, I want something that's kind of loam-like. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be fairly similar in soil texture, which means the percentage of sand, silt, and clay, as well as the organic matter. Now, sod, if I'm installing sod, it takes all those preparation steps that I listed previously, but also it's important to lightly moisten the soil just before I lay down the sod. The sod needs to be laid staggered, perpendicular slopes. Show you a picture of that here in a minute. We want to lightly roll the sod after we've laid it to remove air pockets. We want to stake it on steep slopes so that it doesn't slide when somebody steps on it. We want to moisten and roll it immediately after it's laid, and then keep it moist through root establishment, which will take 10 to 14 days in normal conditions. And then we should try to stay off of it during that time. We want to avoid traffic. So here's an example of the wrong on the left and the right way to lay sod on a slope. We want to lay it perpendicular to the slope. In other words, it's wrong here on the left because the long ways is going down the slope. It's more likely to slide. And if I do it the perpendicular to the slope like it is over here, it's more likely to stay with good integrity and stay in place. Now, the age of the sod's really important. And I see this stuff all the time. The center two pieces on the left there were cut more recently than the others that we purchased. And you can see the difference. It really shows up. Now, usually, those differences will go away in a few days or weeks. The one on the right, this is a month later, we were able to kind of get that sod kind of healthy, but we're still seeing a difference even a month later. So be aware of that. You want sod that's been cut fairly recently. But I say that, and then I show you this. This sod, it was laying on a pallet. It was there for 2 weeks. When I saw these guys installing it, I couldn't believe they were doing it. And I thought, there is no way it's going to survive. Look how yellow it is. It was sitting on that pallet, no sunshine, no air. I thought, no, this stuff is never going to survive. Sometimes plants really surprise us in how resilient they are. This grass actually did get established. Now, it is important to have good quality topsoil underneath that sod. You can see here on the right with topsoil and left without it. And in the picture on the right, the same kind of thing. Now, interestingly enough, over time, the differences kind of disappear. But even 10 years later, this one on the right, this is actually my house. I brought in topsoil. I calculated how much sod I needed. And when I got it, they gave me extra. And I didn't want to waste it. So I just went ahead and laid it down, even though I didn't have topsoil. Those differences I still see in the early spring and in the late fall, even to this day, that more than a decade later. So topsoil really can make a difference. Sometimes sod comes and it's desiccated on the edges, which is a problem. That grass is basically, kind of dead. So you probably should cut that off and not lay it down. Here's LaBelle Edwards Stadium when we did the most recent sod installation. You can see we had some sod rolls that were in trouble. Some that were really kind of light colored. These dark ones, they heated up inside the roll. And I kind of thought maybe they were even dead. And so you've got some differences there. These color differences, this is all from the same farm. This is all the same sod. The color differences you're seeing are based on age of cut, how it was stored, what kind of health it is at, that particular moment. Now, those differences disappeared over time. Oh, okay. Now, sod. The other thing we do is we do stolenizing and springing. So these can be expensive and difficult. They are methods of vegetatively propagating some turf grass where it's not really possible or conducive to do it through seeding. So stolenizing is very common with Bermuda grass, which is the most common warm season grass, as well as bent grass, which is used commonly in golf greens. So we oftentimes will take these stolons, which are basically above ground stems that have nodes on them. And from those nodes, you can grow daughter plants that are genetically identical to the parent. So by taking these stolons and kind of chopping them up and spreading them out, which is stolenizing, or sprigging, where you take kind of a plug and stick it in the ground, we can grow a nice healthy crop through these methods. And again, stolenizing is placing them on the surface. Again, got to keep it moist. Sprigging is very similar, but it can be done with both rhizomes. Now, rhizomes are underground stems. So rhizomes and stomes are very similar they're both stems, but stolons are the ones that go across the surface, above ground. Rhizomes grow underneath the surface. Either way, we can grow daughter plants from those plant materials and grow these things vegetatively. Now, plugging and strip sodding is when I take an actual piece of material it's think of it as like sod, but instead of sodding the whole surface, I'm just sodding little pieces. So, and that can be effective too, especially for grasses that are very aggressive spreaders. This isn't going to work for grasses that are bunch grasses that don't spread, but grasses that have stolons and rhizomes that spread through that naturally, these type of methods work very well. Here's a picture of strip sodding where we just, instead of sodding the whole surface, we're just sodding in strips, and those will fill in over time. Now, overseeding is another thing that we do commonly with warm season grasses. Warm season grasses go dormant, especially in cooler climates, but even in warm climates. Like I work with some sports teams that use Bermuda grass for their sports fields, and they're still playing football, for example, in the late fall when these grasses are starting to go dormant, and people want green grass to play on and to look good. And so we'll overseed with a cool season grass, typically perennial ryegrass, because it just very quick grower, greens up very quickly. So we'll overseed. Typically do that by taking out the thatch layer, make sure it's less than an inch. We want to mow the grass that's there down, to like 3/4 of an inch or less. We're going to apply 20% more seed than normal because it's going to kind of be in a competition mode with the existing grass. So we need to kind of seed a little heavier. And then we want to power vertical rake the seed into the surface of the soil so that we get some seed contact with the soil. Again, it's important to have the right temperatures. If I'm overseeding when it's too hot, it won't work very well. So I want to make sure that my soil temperatures are right. So that's all. It's again important to do seeding and sodding and plugging and all those things. It's important to do them right. Sometimes I see people spending a lot of money, and then when it's all said and done, they don't have much. So they got a big weed patch, or they got dead sod. And so it's critical to follow these steps. Thank you so much.